Good morning. Welcome back here, guys. Hey, keeping up with science here. I appreciate all the hard work you have done. Last week, even before that, we keep talking about how scientists classify, well, especially animals in different ways. And now, of course, part of last week and this week, we're going to focus more on plants, and we're going to continue to do that. But obviously, an animal, there's all kinds of them, so scientists need to kind of group them in different ways. And we went through that with different mammals, amphibians, and things like that. And late last week, we looked a lot about vascular plants and non-vascular plants and the differences there. We're going to review some of that today, but especially how we ended last week with vascular plants. We talked about how those plants, stems and leaves, and the different parts. Today we're going to focus more on the non-vascular, and I'm actually going to first of all mention a couple things. Number one, sorry, let me get my mouse cursor here. Really, it would help you to look at pages 54 to 60. I know that's a big range, but today what we're going to do is kind of overview all of those, and then throughout the week we're going to split them up into smaller sections. So we'll take it piece by piece, but really also what I want to show you is your assignment first. The reason being is exactly what it looks like in your paper packet. And my suggestion, which might save you some time and help you out, is kind of do this assignment while you're watching the video, while we're going along, because you can pause me anytime, and you can find the answer in the book, or you can write down what I just say, or write down what's on the slide. And if you notice, sometimes it helps to preview the assignments so you know what to look for in the video. The first part is maybe one you could probably already answer. What 3 things do people make their own sugar or food? Again, review. God made plants to have things that we don't have in our bodies. God made plants to have chloroplasts, to use the sun's energy to make their own food, which is sugar that they get to make and eat. What are the 3 things plants need to make their own sugar? And then here again, talking all about non-vascular plants here. Don't just write down one thing you learned about moss. Don't write that as green. You're right, you didn't learn that. Again, focus on things that you learned. You got a couple vascular plants and also some vascular plants, but kind of learning how scientists classify them. A lot like when we did animals with mammals and amphibians and things. I already told you that. Here we get into the lesson, okay? Talking specifically, you guys know this and know this well. All plants need sunlight, need water, need carbon dioxide to make their own sugar and food. If you remember carbon dioxide, if you write air, yes, you're technically correct. But if you remember, we say we need air too. But the air we need and the air that plants need is very, very different. See, we breathe in air, but specifically we breathe in oxygen. We breathe out carbon dioxide. You might remember this whole air cycle, right? Well, plants are the opposite. God in His wisdom did that so we never run out of oxygen as long as we have plants, because plants say, hey, thanks guys for the air. We need carbon dioxide. That's what they breathe in through their stomatas, if you remember that. And they breathe out oxygen. That's what they give out. So as long as we have plants, we're never going to run out of oxygen. And as long as plants have, and animals, they're never going to run out of carbon dioxide. Okay, enough about plants. Well, I guess we're going to keep talking about plants. But more specifically, what we're going to talk about plants is how they vary in all kinds of different ways. And you guys know this. The grass outside of your house is different than the pine tree, which is different than the tumbleweed, so on and so forth. So how do we classify them, right? Well, first of all, with plants, you guys know this, a little bit of review, conditions must be right. What I mean by that, you can see down here, by the way, a lot of non-vascular moss here, conditions are right. They have sunlight, they have water right there, and they have air, specifically carbon dioxide. Well, if you give it all the sunlight it needs and all the air it needs, but you don't give it water, they're not going to grow. They need all of it. And they need all of it to grow, to sprout, to germinate. If you hear the word germination, that's a big scientific fancy pants word for sprouting. This is a picture of a plant germinating or sprouting, right, from the seed, which we're going to talk about later in the week, and so on and so forth. That pops out of the ground, and you can see the roots down here and things like that. That's sprouting or germinating. You might ask again, well, how do you know to grow into a tree or grow into a bush? That's in their DNA. Going back to all the plant cells, and in the nucleus, which is in every single cell, they have what's called DNA. God put it in every last cell, and you too, but in every plant cell, so it knows exactly how to grow and when to grow and what to grow into and things like that. I love studying science. It just shows how God is amazing, huh? Let's get into kind of a little bit of review. I purposely chose this picture because we can see a lot of, first of all, plants that we're going to talk about today, but specifically these big V words. I should say V and NV word, huh? The vascular and the non-vascular. Can you pick out a vascular plant in here? All right, this tree is a vascular plant. This fern is a vascular plant. Remember, vascular plant, they have those tube-like structure in there. That's how they transport nutrients. So this vascular tree here has roots way down here that suck up the water, and it goes right here, literally through tubes or straw-like things that go all the way up to the leaves, way at the very top. And the leaves, that's where the photosynthesis occurs, right? Where it makes its food from the sunlight. It makes its own food, and it sends it right back down here, all the way down to the stem and the roots. Every last cell gets food and water and air, right? Find a non-vascular plant now. If you guys said the moss, you're exactly right. And please notice this moss you see in a wet or damp area don't have any kind of roots. They don't have those tube-like structures, which is why we call them non-vascular. So they have to be right by water or a water source. It's kind of funny how they work. Kind of neat teamwork how God made them, because each cell kind of takes the water and then passes it on to the next cell and passes it on to the next cell. Even though non-vascular plants typically are very, very small, they still are made up of a lot of cells because cells are so microscopic. But remember that because we're going to talk about all kinds of different plants and how scientists classify them. Remember the difference between vascular and non-vascular, please. Let's get right into the first one, huh? You might remember this picture from last couple of weeks, and by the way, again, if you have your assignment sheet, you can go ahead and pause this and write down the answer right here in the slide, huh? But mosses are non-vascular. Mosses really typically are very small, very short. And here's something you're going to see and hear a lot about this week. Specifically talking about seeds and because we're going to be talking a lot about how plants reproduce. Or in other words, how plants make more plants. I think you probably knew the basics of maybe heard words like pollination, and that pollen is pretty important for plant reproduction, and the seeds, of course. I think you probably knew that plants grow from seeds, but we're going to talk about that specifically. But take a look at this. Mosses are non-vascular. They have no tubes. They have seeds, and they have no flowers. We're going to, again, talk about later how these types of plants reproduce or how more mosses come, but I would bet you learned something there about moss, huh? Write that down in your assignment. If you want to pause me, go ahead. I won't be offended, but if not, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to ferns. Now, ferns are vascular. Ferns aren't the tallest plants in the forest, but they still have some height. They can grow tall because they have the tube-like structures. But please notice this. They're vascular, but they don't have seeds, and they don't have flowers. We're going to talk about spores a little bit later, but that's kind of how a lot of these plants with no seeds, how they reproduce there, right? And again, the flowers we're going through right now, we're going to learn more about pollination later in the week, but that's a really important part of how plants reproduce. They don't have flowers, usually don't have seeds. Okay, here we go. Here's some conifers. Here's some conifers. If you see conifer, you might be able to see the word cone in there, right? Conifers are trees like pine trees and things like that. A lot of those cones that you might have all over the front of your yard because down, right? Well, a lot of trees you might see have flowers, but never a conifer. Never. Never the pine trees. You never see flowers there. A lot of conifers you see because of the cones and the needles, but they do have seeds. Those are in the cones, by the way, but you won't ever see them flowering. Now, moving on. Oops. I'm sorry, I skipped too many. If you're sick about talking about plants with no flowers, let's talk about flowering plants. This is the big deal for plant reproduction, or how plants make seeds. Again, they don't all have to. We just talked about conifers that do make seeds, but they don't flower. We're going to talk about how the flowers help soon, but when I talk about flowering plants, I don't want you to think just of flowers, okay? There's a lot of flowering plants, in fact, a lot of trees that have flowers, do seeds. Outside our lot in school, we have those mesquite trees. Those have a type out there where they can get pollinated by different animals. A lot of fruit trees have pollen. Apple trees, have flowers. Apple trees and pear tree, bush, whatever you want to call it, different things like that. They all flower so that they can get pollinated there. And then once they get pollinated, they produce a seed, and you can plant a new tree or a new flower, things like that. Now we have one. Now I'll be honest, scientists, they classify this fungi. This is where it gets tricky if you're a scientist. Fungi are like mushrooms. I know if you play Mario Kart and Mario, you're used to fungi running around, but that's not exactly what we're talking about. Now I know we've been spending this on plants, but I purposely put this in today because fungi are not plants. They're not. They do not use photosynthesis. They do not have chloroplast in the cell. They don't do any of that. You say, well, what in the world? Every living thing has to eat, right? True, right. Every animal gets food. Every plant with chloroplasts, they can make their own food. But remember, again, fungi are not plants. Mushrooms are not plants. God purposely put them in, and again, spoiler alert, but in actually a couple weeks we're going to talk about decomposers. That's what fungi are. You might see a lot of mushrooms, and you usually see them on dead stuff. Well, that's how they get their food. They absorb nutrients from the dead things around them. They do not get their food from the sun. They do not have chloroplasts. They are not plants. But I just want to put them in there because a lot of people think that they are. They're not. They're not. Now, getting back to what we showed you, I know it's a little bit of a longer video, but again, I know we went through like 9 different pages today. For the rest of the week and even the beginning of next week, we're going to kind of divide those up into smaller sections and talk more about seeds, talk more about flowers and different things like that. But please remember, just focusing on how scientists classify them, this is your assignment. I hope you did a lot of it while we were going through the video, because if you did, hit pause here and you notice that you're done, or maybe have 1 or 2 left. And don't hesitate to go back through the slides and write down what you saw there. But hey guys, I want to wish you Lord's blessings as you praise your Savior, and we'll see you soon.